Central Valley was one of those American cities that grew too fast for its own comfort. With a population of 100,000, it was the industrial center of Nevada, a place where anyone could get lost in the crowd if they wanted to. That's why Roberta Morgan chose it 3 years ago when she left her hometown in Utah. At 26, Roberta had learned to live two lives. During the day, she worked as an administrator at Dr. Williams' dental clinic on Main Street. Neat blouse, strict skirt, hair pulled back into an elegant bun. Her colleagues knew her as a quiet, reliable employee who was never late and rarely participated in office gossip. In the evenings, Roberta transformed into Selena, the name she used to post ads on private online platforms. She wore silk dresses, professional makeup, and took photos in the soft light of her small apartment in the Oaks Hill neighborhood. Clients paid good money for her company, and Roberta learned to give them exactly what they wanted. A beautiful, attentive woman who knew how to listen and didn't ask unnecessary questions. But there was one detail she never revealed, a detail that could destroy everything she had so carefully built. Roberta was a transgender woman. Her transition began at the age of 18, and now, after 8 years of hormone therapy and several surgeries, few could suspect the truth. But the fear of being exposed never left her. In the world of escort services, honesty could cost not only your reputation, but your life. On this rainy October evening, Roberta was getting ready to meet one of her regular clients. Scott Harris had contacted her through a regular platform almost 6 months ago, and they had been meeting every 2 weeks since then. He was one of those men who were looking not only for physical intimacy, but also for an emotional connection. This made the job both easier and more difficult. Scott Harris was a divorced mechanic, 34 years old, owner of a small auto repair shop in the industrial part of the city of Tull, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and tired eyes. His ex-wife Melinda had taken their 7-year-old son Jake and moved to California 2 years ago, leaving Scott alone with feelings of defeat and loneliness. Roberta knew these details because Scott liked to talk. After they were intimate, they often lay in bed, and he would talk about his job, about his son, whom he only saw on weekends via video chat, about how difficult it was to start over in middle age. Roberta listened, asking questions occasionally, and Scott seemed to appreciate it more than anything else. "You're not like the others," he would sometimes tell her. "You're real." Those words hurt Roberta every time, and she hid the pain carefully. How real would he think she was if he knew the truth? At 7 o'clock in the evening, Roberta's phone vibrated with a message. "Hi, Selena. Can we meet up tonight? I've had a rough day." Roberta looked at herself in the hallway mirror. Her makeup was flawless. Her black dress accentuated the figure she had worked so hard to achieve over years of therapy and exercise. On the outside, she looked like the woman she had always wanted to be. Inside, however, fear and exhaustion from constantly pretending were at war. "Sure. Same place, same time?" "Yes, thank you." The Grand Plaza Hotel in the business district of Central Valley was expensive enough to ensure discretion, but not so upscale as to attract undue attention. Roberta knew the concierge by sight, and he knew her, as a woman who sometimes visited guests. The money in the envelope at the beginning of each month ensured his silence and indifference. Room 847 was reserved under Scott's name. Roberta took the elevator, feeling the familiar tension before the meeting. Over the past 6 months, their relationship had become almost routine, but something about their recent encounters had made her wary. Scott had become more affectionate, asking more personal questions and taking an interest in her life outside their meetings. Scott opened the door almost immediately after she knocked. He was wearing jeans and a plaid shirt, his hair damp from the shower. On the table by the window was a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. "Selena?" he said, his face lighting up with a smile that lately seemed too warm for a business relationship. "How are you?" "Everything's fine," Roberta replied, taking a glass of wine from him. "How about you? You said you had a tough day." Scott sighed, sitting down on the edge of the bed. A big order fell through. The client changed his mind at the last minute, and Melinda called about Jake. She wants to increase child support. Roberta sat down next to him, leaving a little space between them. It was part of her job to be a therapist as much as a companion. "Tell me about it," she said softly. The next hour was spent talking. Scott laid out his problems, and Roberta listened, occasionally touching his hand or shoulder. Physical intimacy was important, but emotional support was just as important. Many of her clients, she had learned over the years, paid not so much for sex as for the illusion of understanding. When they finally made love, Roberta was cautious, as always. Years of experience had taught her to control the situation so as to hide the peculiarities of her body. In the dim light of the room, illuminated only by a bedside lamp, it was not difficult. But afterwards, as they lay side by side, Scott said something that made her sit up. "Selena, I want you to know that what we have isn't just business, at least not for me." Roberta felt the muscles in her back tense. This was dangerous territory. Emotional attachment from clients always complicated things. "Scott, no, hear me out." He turned to her, his eyes serious in the uneven light of the lamp. "I know what our agreement is, but you've become more to me than you know. You've become a friend, maybe more than a friend." Roberta sat down carefully on the bed, pulling the sheet up to her chest. "Scott, we have to keep our boundaries." "What boundaries?" He sat down too, his face full of hope. "We're both adults. We like each other. Why don't we try something real?" The word real cut Roberta's heart again. If only he knew how complicated the concept of real was in her life. "It's not that simple," she said, starting to get dressed. "I have rules. They protect us both." Scott watched her put on her dress, his expression slowly changing from hope to disappointment. "Rules," he repeated. "Always those damn rules. What if I'm ready to break them?" "But I'm not ready," Roberta replied, fastening her shoes. She knew she had to leave now before the situation became even more complicated. Scott got out of bed and threw on his robe. "Selena, wait. I didn't mean to scare you. I just don't know how to say it. You're important to me, more than you should be." Roberta stopped at the door, her hand on the handle. Part of her wanted to turn around, hug him, tell him the truth about who she really was. But the stronger part, the part that had learned to survive, knew that would be a mistake. "Goodbye, Scott," she said quietly and left the room. In the elevator, as she descended, Roberta felt her hands tremble. She took out her phone and dialed Jessica's number. "Hi, friend," a familiar voice answered. "How's it going?" "Jess, can I come over? I need to talk." "Sure, I'm home. What's wrong?" "I'll tell you when I get there." 20 minutes later, Roberta was sitting on the sofa in Jessica Wright's small apartment in Maple Heights. Jessica was one of the few people in Central Valley who knew the truth about Roberta's past. They had met at the beauty salon where Jessica worked as a hairdresser and had gradually become close friends. "One of your clients?" Jessica asked, pouring tea into 2 mugs. "Scott, a regular. He says he wants a real relationship." Jessica sat down next to her, studying her friend's face. "And that's a problem because he doesn't know who I really am." Roberta wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling the warmth of the porcelain. "Jess, what if he finds out? What if he reacts badly?" "Robbie, we've already discussed this. Sooner or later, someone has to tell the truth. Not all men care about that. But some do. And I don't know what type Scott is." Jessica sighed. "Then maybe it's time to end it with him? Find other clients?" "Maybe," Roberta agreed. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be that easy. In 6 months, Scott had become more than just a source of income. He had become a part of her life, and the thought of losing that connection scared her more than she was willing to admit. They talked until midnight, but when Roberta returned home, the problem hadn't gone away. Lying in bed in her dark apartment, she thought about Scott's gaze, about how he had said the word real, about how difficult it was to live between 2 worlds. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new decisions to make. But tonight, she just wanted to forget, and not think about how her double life was slowly, but surely, leading to disaster. The next morning began with a phone call Roberta wasn't expecting. She was making breakfast in her small kitchen when the screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in 3 months. "Dad?" she said, answering the call. "Hi, Roberta." Tom Morgan's voice sounded tired even over the phone. "How are you?" Tom Morgan was a man of the old school. 58 years of life in small towns in Utah, 30 years working in a cement factory, a wife who died of cancer 5 years ago, When his son Robert announced his desire to become a daughter, it shattered something fundamental in Tom's understanding of how the world worked. "Everything's fine, Dad. How about you?" "The doctors say my heart's acting up. They want to put me in the hospital for tests." Roberta felt her stomach tighten. "What exactly are they saying? Is it serious?" "I don't know yet, maybe. Listen, Roberta, if anything happens, I need to know that everything is okay between us." It was the longest conversation they had had in 2 years. After Roberta moved to Nevada, their communication had been reduced to short messages on holidays and occasional phone calls filled with awkward silence. "Of course, Dad. Everything's fine." "Good. Good." Pause. "Are you happy there?" The question caught Roberta off guard. Tom had never asked about her happiness. Usually, their conversations were about the weather, health, work, safe topics that didn't require deep emotions. "I'm trying to be happy," she replied honestly. "That's all we can do, I guess." After they said goodbye, Roberta sat in the kitchen for a long time, holding her cold cup of coffee. Her relationship with her father was one of the most painful parts of her transformation. Tom loved his son, but he couldn't understand his daughter. He tried, as evidenced by how carefully he used her new name, but the gap between them seemed insurmountable. At work, the day passed in its usual routine. Dr. Williams' clinic was busy, and Roberta was grateful for the need to focus on patient records, insurance paperwork, and phone calls. Her colleagues treated her with professional courtesy, but she never felt truly part of their world. Around noon, Detective Sarah Connolly walked into the clinic. Roberta recognized her from photos in the local news, an experienced Central Valley Police Department investigator specializing in homicide cases. Connolly was a middle-aged woman with short graying hair and a sharp gaze that seemed to see more than most people were willing to reveal. "I'd like to speak with Dr. Williams," she said to the receptionist. "It concerns one of his patients." Roberta showed her into the office, feeling curious but not daring to ask any questions. Half an hour later, the detective emerged, looking pensive. "Good day," she said to Roberta, and there was that special tone in her voice that police officers use when they're working on a case. After work, Roberta stopped by the grocery store and then the gym. Exercise helped her stay in shape, but more importantly, it allowed her to release the tension that had built up inside her. An hour on the treadmill and some weight training helped clear her head of her morning thoughts about her father and yesterday's conversation with Scott. In the evening, the phone rang again. This time it was Scott. "Hi, Selena. Can we talk?" "Sure. What's up?" "I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I shouldn't have pressured you. It was wrong." Roberta sat down on the sofa, feeling relieved that he wasn't insisting. "It's okay, Scott. I understand." "No, it's not okay. I broke our rules and it was selfish of me." Pause. "But I can't say I didn't mean it." "Scott, let me finish. I won't bring it up again. I promise. But I want you to know that you're special. Not just professionally, as a person." Roberta closed her eyes. Every word he said made the situation more complicated. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Can we meet tomorrow? Same time? No pressure." "Okay." After the conversation, Roberta decided to visit Jessica. She needed to talk to someone who understood the complexity of her situation. Jessica lived in a small house in an old part of town that was gradually being gentrified. Young professionals were buying post-war houses and renovating them, turning a working-class neighborhood into a trendy area. Jessica herself was part of this wave. She had bought her house 2 years ago with money she had saved over years of working at an upscale beauty salon. "You look exhausted," Jessica said, letting her friend into the house. "Thanks for being honest," Roberta tried to smile. They settled into the living room with glasses of wine. Jessica was one of the few people with whom Roberta could be completely herself. Not Selena, not the perfect clinic worker, just Roberta with all her fears and doubts. "Did Scott call?" "Yes, he apologized for yesterday, but at the same time made it clear that his feelings hadn't gone away." "And how do you feel about him?" The question caught Roberta off guard. She had spent so much time thinking about what Scott felt that she had forgotten to analyze her own emotions. "I don't know," she admitted. "He's a good man. Kind, honest. He makes me feel normal." "Normal?" "Like I'm just a woman that a man likes. Not a trans woman, not a sex worker, just a woman." Jessica took a sip of wine, pondering her friend's words. Robbie, what if he reacts normally? What if it's not a problem for him? What if it is? What if he feels betrayed? What if he gets angry? Then he's not the man you think he is. But by then, it'll be too late. He'll know where I work, where I live. He could tell other people. Jessica understood her friend's fears. In a world where transgender women face discrimination and violence, caution was a matter of survival. Maybe it's time to quit escort work altogether, she suggested. And how am I going to pay for my apartment? For therapy? For medication? Roberta shook her head. Working at the clinic doesn't cover all my expenses. Find another job? With my education? In this city? Roberta smiled bitterly. Jess, I've tried. When I first moved here, I applied to dozens of places. Half of the employers screened me out after the interview as soon as they realized I was trans. The rest offered wages that were enough to survive on, but not to live on. It was a painful truth. Despite equal opportunity laws, discrimination existed in more subtle forms. Rejections. For other reasons, awkward pauses during interviews, job openings suddenly disappearing after applications were submitted. So what are you going to do about Scott? I don't know. Keep going as usual, I guess. Hope he doesn't push for a relationship. What if he does? Then I'll have to lose him. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in her own thoughts. By the way, Jessica said, wanting to change the subject, the police were at the salon today. Detective Connolly. She was asking about a woman who went missing last week. Roberta looked up. Detective Connolly? I saw her at the clinic today. Yes, her. She's a serious woman. She said the missing woman worked in our neighborhood. She showed us a photo. Young, pretty. She could have been one of our clients. What did she ask? The usual things. If we'd seen her, if we knew anything about her habits, her friends. I couldn't say anything. I'd never seen her before. Roberta felt a slight chill. Missing women of their age rarely disappeared voluntarily. I hope she's all right. Yes, me too. Late that evening, Roberta returned home. She took a shower, removed her makeup, and sat down in front of the mirror in her bedroom. In the reflection, she saw the face she had carefully crafted over the years. Soft features, neatly plucked eyebrows, skin that hormones had made smoother. But sometimes, especially when she was tired, she could still see traces of the boy from Utah who had dreamed of becoming her. Her phone vibrated with a message. Scott. Good night, Selena. Thanks for understanding. Roberta stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Good night, Scott. She went to bed, but sleep would not come. Her thoughts revolved around her conversation with her father, Scott's proposal, Jessica's story about the missing woman. All these threads seemed to weave together into a pattern she could not quite make out. Somewhere in the city, Detective Connolly was also awake, studying the documents related to the missing woman's case. Somewhere, Scott was lying in his bed, thinking about the woman he knew as Selena. Somewhere, Tom Morgan was taking his heart medication and thinking about his conversation with his daughter. All these lives intersected at invisible points, creating a complex web of relationships and secrets. And at the center of this web was Roberta, trying to maintain a balance between who she was and who she had to appear to be. Tomorrow would bring another meeting with Scott. 2 weeks later, Roberta's life began to fall apart at an alarming rate. It all started with what seemed like a minor event, a broken heel on her shoe right before her meeting with Scott. She was standing in front of the mirror in her bedroom getting ready for another date when she heard a distinctive crack. The heel of her favorite black shoes had broken off, leaving her without a suitable pair. All her other shoes were either too casual or in need of repair. Damn, Roberta muttered, glancing at her watch. She had 40 minutes until her meeting, and there was no time to go to a shoe store. Then she remembered a small shop called Quick Repair on Oak Street, just 2 blocks from her house. The owner, an elderly Italian man named Vincenzo, was famous for being able to repair almost any shoe in 15 minutes. Roberta threw her coat over her cocktail dress and ran to the shop, limping on her broken heel. Fortunately, Vincenzo was there and promised to fix her shoes in 10 minutes. Beautiful shoes, he said, examining the damage. Expensive. They'll be like new. While she waited, Roberta nervously checked her phone. Scott was supposed to be at the hotel in 20 minutes. She sent him a message about a slight delay. At that moment, a man in overalls walked into the shop. Roberta looked up and felt the blood drain from her face. It was Scott. He was holding work boots in his hands and didn't notice her at first. When their eyes met, his face expressed complete astonishment. "Selena?" he said incredulously. "What are you doing here?" Roberta felt panic rising in her chest. She was wearing a casual coat, minimal makeup, and was a block away from her home. Her entire image as a mysterious escort was crumbling in a second. "I broke my heel," she muttered, pointing to the shoes in Vincenzo's hands. Scott slowly approached, studying her face as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Do you live here? In this neighborhood?" "Nearby," Roberta replied, realizing that every word was driving her further into a corner. "All done," Vincenzo announced, handing her the repaired shoes. "Like new, I told you." Roberta took the shoes with trembling hands and quickly paid. Scott had been watching her silently the whole time. "I have to go," she said, heading for the exit. "Selena, wait." Scott followed her out onto the street. "We were supposed to meet in an hour." "Yes, I know, I'll be there." "But you live here? 2 blocks from the hotel?" His voice sounded puzzled. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Roberta stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Passers-by hurried past them, going about their business. The autumn wind ruffled her hair, and she felt completely vulnerable. "Scott, it's hard to explain." "Try." His voice became more serious. "Selena, I haven't seen you outside the hotel once in 6 months. You've always been so mysterious. And now it turns out you live practically around the corner from where we meet." Roberta knew she was on the verge of disaster. Every word could lead to exposure, but silence was also suspicious. "I value my privacy," she said finally. "Privacy?" Scott shook his head. "Selena, I told you about my divorce, my son, my business problems. I opened up to you, and you can't even tell me what neighborhood you live in? It's not the same thing." "Why?" He took a step closer, and Roberta saw the pain in his eyes. "Why isn't it the same thing? Because I'm a client and you're a service provider? Because there can't be anything real between us?" The word real cut Roberta again. If only he knew how complicated the concept of real was in her world. "Scott, let's not discuss this on the street." "Then where? In a hotel where you can control the situation? Where you can remain the mysterious Selena?" There was a note of irritation in his voice that Roberta had never heard before. The kind, understanding Scott was turning into a man who felt betrayed. "Okay," she said, making a decision that could change everything. "Let's go to my place." Scott blinked, clearly not expecting such a suggestion. "Are you serious?" "Yes, but first I need to change." They walked silently for 2 blocks to Roberta's house. It was a small, 2-story building with 4 apartments, built in the 50s and recently renovated. Roberta lived on the 2nd floor, in a corner apartment with large windows overlooking the park. "Wait here," she said, letting Scott into the living room. "I'll be quick." In her bedroom, Roberta quickly changed into jeans and a sweater, washed off her bright makeup, and pulled her hair back into a simple ponytail. In the mirror, she saw herself as she was at home, without masks, without personas, just Roberta. When she returned to the living room, Scott was standing by the bookcase, examining her collection. "Tolstoy, Dickens, Margaret Atwood," he said without turning around. "Not what I expected to see." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Fashion magazines, maybe. Romance novels." He turned to her. "You look different." "How?" "Younger. More real." That word again. Roberta sat down on the sofa, motioning Scott to the chair opposite her. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you. I want to talk." He sat down, never taking his eyes off her. "Selena, what's going on? Who are you really?" Roberta felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment of truth she had been dreading. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. In 6 months, I've never seen you without a full face of makeup. You've always been perfectly dressed, always in control. And now," he gestured at her simple clothes, "now you look like a normal woman." "I am a normal woman." "Then why all the secrets? Why can't you just be yourself?" Roberta stood up and walked over to the window. Below, children were playing in the park, their laughter drifting through the glass. Such a simple, normal life seemed like an unattainable luxury to her. "Scott, my job requires me to maintain certain boundaries." "What boundaries? Between what and what?" "Between work and my personal life. Between who I play and who I am." Scott stood up and walked over to her. "Who are you, Selena?" Roberta closed her eyes. This was the moment she had been dreading. She could have lied, made up a story, kept her secret. But something in Scott's voice, in his genuine interest, made her want to tell the truth. "My name isn't Selena," she said quietly. "I thought so. What's your real name?" "Roberta." "Roberta." He repeated the name as if tasting it. "That's a beautiful name. Why did you hide it?" "Because it's better to use pseudonyms in my line of work." "I see. What else have you been hiding?" This was it, the point of no return. Roberta turned to face him. Scott was standing very close, his eyes full of curiosity and something else, perhaps tenderness. "Scott, there are things you might not understand. Try to explain it to me." Roberta took a deep breath. "I wasn't always like this." "What do you mean?" "I mean," the words stuck in her throat. "I mean, I was born in a male body." The silence that followed those words seemed like an eternity. Scott stood motionless, his face slowly changing from confusion to shock. "What?" he finally said. "I'm a transgender woman, Scott. I transitioned 8 years ago." Scott took a step back as if she had hit him. His face turned pale. "You're a man?" "No, I'm a woman. I've always been a woman inside. It's just my body." "My God!" Scott ran his hand over his face. "My God, Selena Roberta, whatever your name is." "Scott, let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice became harsher. "Explain how you deceived me for 6 months. Explain how we... He didn't finish, but Roberta understood what he was thinking. About all their meetings, their intimacy, how he spoke of his true feelings. "I didn't deceive you. I am who I appear to be. I am a woman." "You were born a man!" Scott's voice broke into a scream. "I was born in a male body, but with a female soul. Those are different things." Scott began to pace the room like a caged animal. "I don't understand. I don't understand how this is possible. You look like a woman, you talk like a woman, because I am a woman. But you have male. I've had surgery, Scott. A lot of surgery, hormone therapy, years of treatment." Scott stopped and looked at her. His eyes were a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, perhaps disgust. "And you thought I had a right not to know about this? I was afraid of your reaction." "My reaction?" Scott laughed bitterly. "How do you think I should react? Should I be happy that the woman I slept with for 6 months was actually a man?" "I'm not a man!" Roberta shouted back. "I've never been a man. My body was male, but I'm not. It's the same thing." "No, it's not the same." They stood facing each other, both breathing heavily. Roberta saw in Scott's eyes what she had feared so much, incomprehension turning to anger. "Scott, please listen to me. I'm the same woman you've known all these months. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed!" Scott slammed his fist on the back of the chair. "Everything, damn it, has changed! I thought I knew you. I thought we had something. And it turns out you've been lying to me all this time." "I didn't lie. I just didn't say anything." "That's called lying." Roberta felt tears welling up in her eyes. This was the scenario she had feared most. "Scott, I understand that this is a shock. But if you think about it, think about what? That I had sex with a man? That all my friends will laugh at me if they find out? Your friends won't find out unless you tell them. And if I do?" There was a threat in that question that Roberta heard immediately. Her blood ran cold. "Scott, please, you won't..." "What won't I do? Won't tell the truth about who you really are? It will ruin my life." "What about my life? What about what you did to me?" Scott walked to the door, then spun around. "You know what, Roberta, or whatever your name is? I need time to think. I need to understand what this all means." "Scott, wait." But he was already out the door, slamming it behind him. Roberta was left alone in her living room, trembling with fear and adrenaline. She went to the window and saw Scott walking quickly down the street without looking back. Her phone rang. Jessica. Hey, friend. How's it going? Jess, Roberta's voice trembled. He found out. What? Who found out? Scott. He found out I'm trans. Pause. Where are you? At home. He just left. I'm coming over. Don't do anything stupid. Roberta hung up and sat down on the sofa. Outside, the sun was setting, bathing the room in golden hues. Somewhere in the city, Scott was trying to make sense of what he had learned. Somewhere, Detective Connolly was continuing her investigation into the disappearance. Somewhere, her father was taking his heart medication. And here, in her living room, Roberta sat amid the wreckage of her carefully constructed double life, realizing that the worst was yet to come. Jessica Wright arrived at Roberta's apartment 40 minutes after the call. She found her friend sitting on the sofa in the same position Scott had left her in, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring into space. Jessica sat down next to her and took her friend's hands in hers. He found out, Roberta repeated quietly. He found out everything. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Roberta recounted the events of the day in detail. The chance encounter at the workshop, Scott's arrival home, his confession, his reaction. Jessica listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions. And how did he leave? What exactly did he say? That he needed time to think, that he had to understand what it all meant. Jess, you saw his face. He was furious. Jessica frowned. That doesn't sound promising. What should I do? If he tells everyone, then you'll move, find another job, start over. Where? Roberta laughed bitterly. To another city where it will all start over again? Where I'll live in fear that someone will find out again? Jessica didn't answer because she knew her friend was right. For transgender people, every new city meant new risks, a new need to hide their past. Maybe he'll calm down, think about it and realize that you're the same woman. You saw how he looked at me, like I was a monster. They sat together until midnight, discussing possible scenarios. Jessica offered to stay the night, but Roberta refused. She needed to be alone to process what had happened. After her friend left, Roberta took a shower, put on her pajamas, and went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. Images from the last few hours were spinning in her head. Scott's face in the workshop, his eyes full of shock and anger, the slam of the front door. Around 1 a.m, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Her heart began to beat faster. Maybe Scott had come back? Maybe he had changed his mind? A soft knock on the door confirmed her guess. Roberta, it's me. Scott's voice sounded calmer than it had a few hours ago. Roberta got out of bed, threw on a robe, and went to the door. Scott, are you okay? Can I come in? I need to talk to you. Roberta hesitated. Part of her wanted to open the door and give him a chance to explain. Another part warned her. There was something strange in his voice. I know it's late, Scott continued, but I couldn't sleep. I need to understand. We need to talk about this. Roberta turned the lock and opened the door. Scott was standing in the hallway, still wearing the same clothes he had on that afternoon. His hair was tousled, his face looked tired. Come in, she said quietly. Scott walked into the living room where he had learned the truth that morning. Roberta turned on the table lamp, leaving the main lights off. Would you like some coffee? Tea? No, thank you. Scott sat down on the edge of the sofa, still wearing his jacket. I've just been thinking about what you said all day. And I still don't understand. He looked up at her. How could you not tell me? 6 months, Roberta. For 6 months I thought I knew you. You knew me. You still do. I haven't changed. Everything has changed. Scott's voice became harsher. Do you understand how I feel? I told you about my problems, about my son, about my ex-wife. I opened up to you, and you lied to me the whole time. I didn't lie about my feelings. I didn't lie about who I am. You lied about what you were. Scott stood up and began pacing the room. You were born a man, Roberta. That's a fact. I was born in a male body, Roberta repeated patiently. But my soul, my mind, my heart have always been female. That's not the same thing. To me, it's the same thing. Scott stopped in the middle of the room, clenching his fists. Not to me. To me, it means that for 6 months, I thought we were... He couldn't finish the sentence. What were we, Scott? Were we close? Did we trust each other? Did we find comfort in each other's arms? I didn't know who I was close to. You were close to me. To Roberta. To the woman who cared for you. Scott laughed bitterly. Woman? You call yourself a woman? Those words hit Roberta like a slap in the face. She saw in his eyes what she feared most, contempt. I am a woman. No, you're not a woman. You're a man who decided to dress up as a woman. That's not true. Then what is it? Explain it to me? Scott took a step closer to her. Explain how a man can become a woman? I've never been a man, Roberta shouted. My body was male, but I am myself. Your body is you. You can't just decide you're a woman. I didn't decide. I've always known. They stood facing each other, both breathing heavily. The tension in the room was palpable. Scott, please try to understand. Understand what? That you've been deceiving me for 6 months? That you made me feel this way? Like what? Gay, he shouted. You made me feel gay. You're not gay, Scott. You fell in love with a woman. With a man. With me. Scott turned away, covering his face with his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was shaking. You know what the worst part is? I thought about asking you to marry me. Roberta felt her heart tighten with pain. Scott, I imagined our life together. I thought about how you could be a stepmother to Jake. He turned to her. And now I have to explain to myself how I could have fallen in love with a man. You didn't fall in love with a man. You fell in love with me, the woman I've always been. Enough! Scott slammed his fist into the back of the chair. Stop repeating that lie. It's not a lie. It's a lie. Everything about you is a lie. Your name, your body, your personality, it's all fake. Roberta felt tears welling up in her eyes. My personality is real. My feelings for you were real. Your feelings? Scott laughed bitterly. What feelings? You're a prostitute. You sell your body. I'm not a prostitute. Then what are you? An escort? What does it matter what you call it? At that moment, something inside Roberta broke. Months of fear, years of secrecy, the constant strain of having to pretend. It all came pouring out in a cry of despair. I know who I am. I'm a woman. I've always been a woman. And if you can't understand that, then you never loved me. Loved you? Scott's voice became dangerously quiet. I loved a woman named Selena, and she turned out to be a figment of my imagination. Selena is me! Selena doesn't exist. Roberta felt the room begin to spin. Exhaustion, emotional tension, fear, it all washed over her like a wave. Go away, she said quietly. What? Go away, please, right now. Scott didn't move. Roberta, go away. I don't want to see you anymore. All right, he said slowly. All right, but know this. This isn't the end. I can't just forget what you did to me. What do you mean? I mean, people need to know the truth about you. Roberta's blood ran cold. Scott, no. People have a right to know who they're dealing with. You'll ruin my life. What about my life? What about what you did to my life? He headed for the door. The door slammed shut, leaving Roberta alone in the dimly lit living room. She sank down onto the sofa, feeling the last of her strength leave her. Outside, she heard footsteps receding down the stairs. Then the front door slammed shut. Then silence. Roberta sat in the dark, realizing that her life had just fallen apart. Scott was angry, hurt, humiliated, and he promised to tell the truth to others. She got up and went to the window. Streetlights lit up the empty sidewalk. Somewhere out there in the night, a man who felt betrayed was driving home, a man who held her future in his hands. Roberta returned to her bedroom, lay down on the bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would have to make decisions, what to do about her job, her apartment, her life. But today she just wanted to forget. She didn't know that tomorrow would never come for her. Detective Sarah Connolly received a call at 6:47 a.m. The dispatcher's voice was professionally calm, but she detected tension in his tone. Detective, we have a body at 847 Maple Street. A neighbor called the police. What do we know? Connolly was already pulling on her jeans, pressing the phone to her shoulder. A young woman, probably in her 20s. Looks like a homicide. I'm on my way. Maple Street was in the Oaks Hill neighborhood. one of those places in Central Valley where young professionals rented apartments in renovated post-war houses. It was a quiet area where people knew their neighbors by sight, but rarely got involved in each other's business. Police cars and an ambulance were already at the two-story house. Connolly parked behind the yellow tape and showed her badge to the patrolman. "What do we have?" she asked Sergeant Miller. "The victim is Roberta Morgan, 26 years old. The body was found by her neighbor, Mary Evans, who lives downstairs. She says she heard a noise around midnight but didn't think anything of it. In the morning, she noticed that Morgan's door was ajar." "Any signs of forced entry?" "Not that I can see. Either the victim knew the killer or the door wasn't locked." Connolly went up to the second floor. The apartment was on the corner and had large windows. Normally, places like this looked cozy, but now the space was disrupted by the chaos of violence. The body lay in the living room next to an overturned coffee table. Roberta Morgan was dressed in a robe over her pajamas, her hair disheveled. There were signs of strangulation on her neck, and a broken lamp and moved furniture indicated a struggle. "Where's the medical examiner?" "On his way. He should be here within the hour." The detective began her examination, studying the scene. The apartment was neatly furnished, with photographs on the dresser. One of them showed Roberta hugging another young woman. In the bedroom, a phone with a broken screen lay on the bedside table. In the bathroom, Connolly found various medications, including estradiol, a hormone drug. The sound of footsteps made her turn around. Dr. Thomas Lee, the medical examiner, entered the apartment. "What do we have, Sarah?" "Roberta Morgan, 26 years old. Presumed strangulation, but there was a struggle." While Dr. Lee conducted a preliminary examination, Connolly went downstairs to the witness. Mary Evans sat at her kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea. "Tell me about last night," the detective asked. "I went to bed around 11. At about midnight, I heard noises from upstairs, voices, then something fell." "Voices? How many people?" "Two. Roberta and a man. At first they were talking normally, then it got louder, then there was a crash and silence." "Why didn't you call the police?" Mary looked down guiltily. "Roberta sometimes had guests. I thought it was a private matter." After the conversation, Connolly returned upstairs to Dr. Lee. "What can you tell us?" "Death by strangulation. Time of death between midnight and 1 a.m. There are defensive wounds on the victim's hands. Any fingernail marks? Yes, possibly the attacker's DNA. By noon, the forensic team had collected fingerprints and other evidence. Connolly interviewed the neighbors, and Mrs. Chen remembered an important detail. "Around midnight, I saw a man near the house, tall, wearing a dark jacket, broad shoulders, light hair." At the station, Connolly laid out the photos and began her analysis. Roberta lived alone but had male visitors. Expensive cosmetics and clothing suggested an income higher than an administrator's salary. In the victim's notebook, she found an entry. S. Every 2 weeks, GP Hotel. The Grand Plaza Hotel confirmed that Scott Harris had checked into room 847 every 2 weeks. Scott Harris, 34 years old, owner of a car repair shop. It was time to talk to him. Harris Motors was located in the industrial area of Central Valley, between auto parts warehouses and a small metal fabrication shop. Detective Connolly parked near a low building with large garage doors and a sign with paint peeling in places. Inside, it smelled of motor oil and metal. A man in blue overalls was working under the raised hood of an old sedan. Hearing footsteps, he straightened up and turned around. Scott Harris looked exactly as Connolly had imagined him from Mrs. Chen's description. Tall, broad-shouldered, with light hair. He had 2 days' stubble on his face and his hands were stained with motor oil. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Harris? Detective Connolly, Central Valley Police." She showed her badge. "I need to ask you a few questions." Scott's expression changed from friendly to wary. "About what exactly?" "About Robert Morgan. Did you know her?" Scott froze with the rag in his hands. Connolly watched his reaction closely. A few seconds of silence, a quick glance to the side, a slight pale. "I don't think I know anyone by that name," he said finally. "What about Selena?" This time the reaction was more pronounced. Scott put down the rag and leaned against the car. "What happened to her?" "She's dead, Mr. Harris. She was killed last night." Scott closed his eyes and ran his hand over his face. When he looked back at the detective, there was a mixture of shock and something else in his eyes, perhaps relief. My God. When did you last see her? Last night. Where exactly? Scott looked around to make sure they were alone in the garage. At her house. And what time was that? Late. Around 1 in the morning, I think. Connolly jotted it down in her notebook. The time matched the coroner's preliminary findings. Mr. Harris, I think we'd better continue this conversation at the station. Are you willing to come with me voluntarily? Scott nodded, taking off his overalls. I need to close up the shop. In the car on the way to the station, Scott was silent, staring out the window. Connolly didn't rush him. Sometimes silence was more eloquent than words. In the interrogation room at the station, the detective turned on a tape recorder and placed a glass of water in front of Scott. Mr. Harris, for the record, are you waiving your right to an attorney? For now. Okay, tell me about your relationship with Roberta Morgan. Scott took a sip of water, gathering his thoughts. We'd been seeing each other for about 6 months. She was an escort. I was her client. How often did you see each other? Every 2 weeks, usually at the Grand Plaza Hotel. But yesterday you met at her place? Yes, that was unusual. Why? Scott paused, then began to speak slowly, choosing his words carefully. Yesterday afternoon, I ran into her in town, at a shoe repair shop. She looked different, no makeup, wearing ordinary clothes. I realized she lived very close to where we usually met. And what happened next? I asked her for an explanation, why she never told me where she lived. She invited me to her place. And there she told me the truth. Connolly leaned forward. What truth, Mr. Harris? That she was a man, transgender. You didn't know that before? Of course not. Scott's voice rose. Do you think I would have if I did? How did you react to the news? I was in shock. I felt betrayed. For 6 months I thought I knew her, and it turned out... He didn't finish his sentence. What happened after she told you? I left. I needed to think. What time was that? Around 7 in the evening. And then? Scott was silent for a long time, staring into his glass of water. Then I couldn't sleep. I thought about what she said, about what it meant, about what... What exactly did you think about, Mr. Harris? About the fact that I had been having sex with a man for 6 months, about how I felt about him, about wanting to marry him. You wanted to marry Robert? Selena. I thought she was a woman named Selena. And that made you angry? Of course it made me angry. How would you feel if you were me? Connolly didn't answer the question. What happened next? I went to see her, around midnight. Why? I wanted to talk to her again. I thought maybe we could discuss everything calmly. And how did the conversation go? Scott closed his eyes, remembering. Bad. Very bad. I couldn't understand how she could have not told me. And she kept insisting that nothing had changed, that she was the same woman. Did you argue? Yes. I said that people should know the truth about her, that she wasn't just cheating on me. How did she react? She asked me to leave. She said she didn't want to see me anymore. And you left? Another pause, longer this time. No. Connolly felt the tension in the room increase. What happened, Mr. Harris? She started yelling at me, saying that I never loved her, that I was just a coward who couldn't accept the truth. And I lost control. What exactly did you do? Scott opened his eyes and looked straight at the detective. I grabbed her arms. I wanted her to stop screaming, to listen to me. Go on. She tried to break free. She scratched me. Scott pointed to his neck, where thin red marks were visible. I just wanted her to stop, to listen. Mr. Harris, what happened next? I don't remember exactly. She kept fighting, screaming. She said I was going to ruin her life, and then I squeezed her neck, just to make her shut up. The silence in the room was deafening. How long did you squeeze her neck? I don't know. A few seconds? A minute? When I let go, she fell to the floor and wasn't moving. What did you do after that? I tried to wake her up. I shook her, checked her pulse, but she was... Scott's voice trembled. She was dead. Then you left the apartment? Yes, I panicked. I just left. Connolly turned off the tape recorder. Mr. Harris, do you understand that you have just confessed to murder? Scott nodded without looking up. I didn't mean to kill her. I was just so angry. I felt betrayed. You have the right to an attorney. I recommend you exercise that right. An hour later, Scott's lawyer, James Kowalski, an experienced defense attorney specializing in murder cases, arrived at the station. After consulting with his client, he asked to speak with the detective. My client is willing to give a full statement in exchange for consideration of a plea bargain for manslaughter, Kowalski said. That's up to the prosecutor, Connolly replied, but a confession would help. Over the next few hours, Scott recounted in detail the events leading up to the murder. The story he told painted a picture of a man who felt deeply betrayed and reacted with a flash of rage. I've never laid a hand on a woman before, he said, but when I realized what she had been doing to him all these months. Roberta was a woman, Connolly interrupted, regardless of the body she was born in. Not to me, Scott replied quietly. To me, it was a deception. While Scott was giving his statement, Connolly contacted Jessica Wright. The victim's friend was shocked by the news. I told her it was dangerous, Jessica cried on the phone. I told her that sooner or later someone would react badly. Did she tell you about Scott? Yes, she was afraid of his reaction if he found out the truth, but she also loved him. Loved him? Roberta never said it outright, but I could see it. He wasn't just a client to her. She was really attached to him. This information added another tragic aspect to the case. Roberta wasn't just hiding her identity out of fear. She had fallen in love with the man who ultimately killed her. Connolly also contacted Roberta's father, Tom Morgan, in Utah. The conversation was painful. I knew something bad was going to happen, he said in a broken voice, when she decided to live that life. Mr. Morgan, your daughter was the victim of a hate crime. My daughter? He laughed bitterly. Detective, I had a son, a good boy who decided to become someone else. Roberta was your daughter, whether you accept it or not. A long pause. Maybe, but it doesn't matter now, does it? The next day, the story made the local news. Transgender woman killed by client. The headlines were sensational, but Connolly hoped the coverage would draw attention to the issue of violence against transgender people. The community's reaction was mixed. Some expressed sympathy for Roberta and supported stricter hate crime laws. Others, especially in conservative circles, expressed understanding for Scott's position. He had a right to know who he was dealing with, wrote one commenter on social media. No one has the right to kill, others responded. Jessica organized a memorial service for Roberta at a small, progressive church in the city center. A surprising number of people showed up. Colleagues from the dental clinic, neighbors, LGBT activists, even a few people who knew Roberta only as Selena. Roberta was a brave woman, Jessica said in her eulogy. She lived authentically in a world that often refused to accept her. She was killed not because she was a bad person, but because someone couldn't accept her truth. Tom Morgan never showed up at the funeral. 3 months later, the trial took place. Scott Harris pleaded guilty to manslaughter as part of a plea deal. The prosecutor had initially insisted on a second-degree murder charge, but agreed to a lesser charge in exchange for a full confession and cooperation. At the hearing, Scott looked like a broken man. Months in prison and the realization of what he had done changed him. I don't condone my actions, he told the judge. I took a man's life in a moment of anger, and that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. Mr. Harris, the judge said as he handed down the sentence, your sense of betrayal, however strong, does not justify the use of violence. Roberta Morgan had a right to live her life and a right to safety. After the trial, Connolly met with Jessica outside the courthouse. Is that fair? Asked Roberta's friend. Justice is a complicated thing, replied the detective. He will be punished for what he did, but that won't bring Roberta back. What about why he did it? Shouldn't transphobia be considered an aggravating factor? In an ideal world, yes, but laws change more slowly than society. A year after the murder, Central Valley passed a local law called the Roberta's Act, which toughened penalties for hate crimes against transgender people. It was a small step forward, but an important one. Detective Connolly continued to work on other cases, but the murder of Roberta Morgan forever changed her understanding of the dangers faced by marginalized communities. She kept a photo from the crime scene in her desk drawer, not out of gloom, but as a reminder that justice must protect everyone, no matter who they are or what kind of life they live.